So let's get started and keep on time. My name's Davy Phillip. I'm part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Ireland, and I will lightly moderate this webinar. This is a webinar on why Ireland needs a Future Generations Commission. Um, Unfortunately, David Donoghue cannot attend tonight, but I will just run through what we're going to do, and we're finishing at 8:30 sharp. I'm going to invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves. We can build a sense of community and see who's here. And then what we're going to do is we'll get started with David Rossiter from the Coalition 2030 and Karen White from Feasta and the Wellbeing Economy Hub. And that will be followed by a presentation by Catherine Carty. There'll be some time for questions or reflections there. And then we're going to go to a breakout just to gather ideas on how to progress a bill. And then we'll hear from the breakouts and look at the next steps before closing. That's basically what we're doing tonight. Thanks everyone for coming. And I'll pass over to David.
Thanks, Davey. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We're really looking forward to hosting a discussion this evening around a Future Generations Commissioner, Future Generations Bill, which is something that Coalition 2030 have been working on for the last little while. I just introduced myself quickly. So my name is David Rossiter, as I mentioned. So some of you may have known Megan Carmody, who previously had been the coordinator for Coalition 2030. So Megan finished up earlier this year, and I started there at the end of September. And some of you may know this already, but we're a coalition of up to 70 Irish civil society organisations and trade unions, academics, all campaigning for the Irish government to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we've been working with Caroline and Davy on various pieces of work over the last little while. And as I said, we're very, very happy to host you guys this evening. And I'm going to pass over to Caroline, who will introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. My name is Caroline White, and I do research and advocacy for Feasta, which is the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. And we're a member of the Irish Environmental Network and the Environmental Pillar, and we work on ecological economics. So we're looking at how to change economic goals and work towards an economy that can fit well within the planet and the environment, but also enable people to flourish. And so we're part of a global network called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, or WEAll. And WEAll has a series of hubs in different countries. And in Ireland, there's an All Ireland Hub, and it's got several members, which are core members. And we do the secretariat work in Feasta, but we also have Cultivate in the hub. Davy's here from Cultivate. We have the several northern groups like the Queen's University School of Law. So there's a law focus. We have the European Health Futures Forum. So there's a health focus. There's the Irish Donut Economics Network. A lot of you might have heard of Donut Economics, and we have an awful lot in common with them, and we work a lot together. And then there's the Playhouse Theatre in Derry, because we also do a lot of art focused work as well, which we can talk about. That's another point. So basically, we did a big conference last June called Rethinking Growth Towards a Wellbeing Economy for Ireland. And I put a link in the chat later because there was a lot of very interesting outputs from that. And right now, we're really happy to be working with Coalition 2030 on this project, which is organised by this group called the School of International Futures. And the theme of the project is intergenerational fairness in Ireland, which really for us dovetails really well with the idea of a wellbeing economy in Ireland as well. And a lot of you probably have heard of Sophie Howe, who was the first Welsh Commissioner for Future Generations, and she's very strongly involved with the School of International Futures, and she's also an ambassador for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, so she's involved with that as well. So in this project so far, we've done an assessment to get a rough idea of where Ireland is right now in terms of fairness to future generations. And we've looked at lots of aspects of that, including things like risk assessment and strategic foresight and the civil service, all kinds of things. There's a wellbeing framework. A lot of you probably heard of the role of the wellbeing framework. Also things like Ireland's economic resilience and getting away from the high dependency on FDI. So it's very, very foreign direct investment. So it's very wide ranging. Ireland's behaviour and relationship towards other countries. And So the School of International Future, they've suggested some possible next steps for us. And one of them is to help maintain and hopefully build support for the Future Generations Bill in Ireland. And that's something that our next speaker, Catherine Carty, can discuss with a lot of authorities. I'm going to pass on to her. Catherine is the chair of the UNESCO Inclusive Policy Hub at Munster Technical University, and she's also a steering group member of Coalition 2030. So I'll pass on to Catherine now. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm delighted to be here and to be a part of the discussion. So I think there's lots of opportunities for everyone on this call to get engaged in the discussion. And, you know, from what I can see of your welcome messages and joining messages, it's great to see such a spread of people and representation on the call. So thank you all for coming. So I do have a few slides to share, and I'll just get these up. And it's a pretty short presentation that I'll go through about the work that we did, but there'll be plenty of opportunities to discuss what was done. Okay, so great, just moving now. So you should be able to see that now on your screen. Yep, great. So as Caroline indicated and Davy indicated, we looked in Coalition 2030 at the whole area of future generations, which has been part of our mission, I suppose, and our objective in Coalition 2030. If you have our website, or if you've looked at our website, you will see it there in terms of reference to intergenerational fairness and things like that on the Coalition 2030 website. So it's been on our radar for quite a while. And Megan Carmody, who was the previous coordinator, as David mentioned, put together a tender brief, I suppose, for researchers or for research to be done on behalf of Coalition 2030 on the whole area of future generations. And it was framed as a feasibility, looking at feasibility really of future generations, a future generations commissioner or future generations ombudsman, ombudsperson for Ireland, and looking into this whole field. So Audrey Dean Consulting was appointed to take on the role of undertaking this research on behalf of Coalition 2030, which she did, and I'll get into the process of that in a minute. But what we were looking at, what we decided to call, I suppose, the document in the end, was a call to action. So when the coalition and Audrey looked at the outcomes of the work that she had done and the research that she had done, it became very clear to us that it was shaped more as, very much so, as a call to action as opposed to a feasibility study. So we reframed it into that focus. And the other thing that came very much to the fore in the discussions and in the interest was the idea that of taking Irish leadership on intergenerational equity forward. And I know for some of you who may have been attended the Welsh Commissioner's discussion in DCU earlier this year, he spoke about a lot of humility, I suppose, about the idea of intergenerational equity and future generations, and a lack of maybe ownership of the concept. But in Ireland, I think we're very forthright in setting out the fact that we are proud that there has been Irish involvement in pushing this agenda forward, especially in recent years. But it's definitely not a new concept, which I'll come to in a minute, but it is one that I suppose through some Irish leadership has been taken forward to where we're at now. So this year was important to us at Coalition 2030 because of the Summit of the Future and the focus we knew that was going to be on the whole area of future generations. So it was important to get this done this year. As I mentioned, it's not something that's new. So there has been a history of caring for future generations that's long established for many centuries indeed, and in many Indigenous cultures around the world. So it's not something that's brand new, but it is something that has been forgotten really in terms of how we operate in day-to-day leadership and governance and government. And so it's something that we want to put back on the agenda because we've seen the impact of short-term thinking and short-term planning, and it's a value from the past that we've probably lost too much and we would like to see reinstated. Indeed, even in UN history, when we look at our common agenda policy brief, this whole idea and concept of intergenerational planning and working for intergenerations and future generations has been a long established principle as well in planning, but hasn't been taken forward in a very purposeful and intentional way, which is, I guess, what the Summit of the Future and the calls to action and Pact for Future Generations are looking at this year. So the Summit of the Future and the Declaration of Future Generations is something that came about obviously in 2024, which we've seen, and the idea of creating, or the call for creating, a special envoy for future generations at UN level, which again came from the Summit of the Future. So that's a positive development as we see it. And we know that the UN stopped short of calling for countries to establish an ombudsperson or a commissioner for future generations because of, I suppose, the resourcing implications for that would have posed challenges in certain countries. So as a compromise, this special envoy for future generations was put in place, and the Declaration for Future Generations very much calls for countries to establish concerted actions in the interest of future generations and long-term thinking and planning. The European Commission did likewise, appointing an executive vice president of future generations this year to enshrine that long-term thinking into what the European Parliament do. We know that there are many countries around the world, well beyond Europe as well, looking at establishing future generations commissioners in their own countries or regions. And so that is a positive development as well. So it's something that's very much on the radar, and was something that the Coalition 2030 were really keen to undertake research on in an Irish context this year. So we did that. It launched in September, just before the Summit of the Future, and you can scan that QR code there to access the full report. But I believe Davy is going to put a link to that in the chat for this call. So the document is on our website for anyone who wishes to see it. So just a little bit about our methodology. And I mentioned already that Audrey Dean Consulting was appointed to undertake the research on behalf of Coalition 2030. And she did that, conducting 29 interviews. She did a desk review, I suppose, to start with, of what's been done out there already in this space in Ireland and internationally. And obviously a huge amount of work has been done by Marco Kosick, which we know in terms of the bill. So Audrey looked at what has been done in other countries, in Wales and elsewhere as well. She conducted 29 interviews with key stakeholders in Ireland, who are all listed in the document. You'll see in the appendix of the document, we list everyone who was interviewed for that. And a process of purposeful sampling was used to decide on who to interview, and snowballing indeed. Many times people said, oh, you need to speak to W, X, Y, and Z. I actually can't see my own screen now because, well, sorry, there's a list, a number of icons on the top that are hiding my my little presentation. Anyhow, we did 29 interviews with thought leaders across civil society, the political sphere, at the Coalition 2030 Steering Committee, who are representative of a number of organisations in Ireland, who really came in at the latter stage of Audrey's work and looked at what had come out of the interviews. And we looked at the themes that were in those interviews, the themes that were emerging and coming out from that, and coding those, and how best to shape, I suppose, the outcomes of that research into a document. And this is where we decided that the outcomes very much led us to a call to action as opposed to it being a feasibility study. Although we felt that there were very strong precedents coming out from the people who were interviewed and the thought leaders as to how there are already precedents in place in Ireland that we can follow and that we can learn from in terms of what the work that we need to do. But the overarching message that came out from all the interviews that were conducted and the research that was conducted was, you know, like the Nike slogan, and I hope they're not listening, just do it. So, you know, there was very much a strong opinion from people who were interviewed that this is something we need to do and we need to do now. And while we could wait in putting precedents in place or putting legislation in place, there are a number of things that we can do to set the wheels in motion for a Commissioner for Future Generations and really just get going in terms of putting those bits and pieces in place, and we can follow on with the more formal legislative pieces as we go. So the key recommendations emerging from the report were: commit now to establishing a Future Generations Commissioner for Ireland, signalling Ireland's intent to ensure adequate autonomy and resources for that role. So, you know, the idea of the role having sufficient autonomy to do its work effectively was really important, and that was mentioned by many people in the research, and also that it would be adequately resourced to do its research. So we are talking about a commissioner, but we're talking about an office of the commissioner. So it's not just one person, it's an office for the Commissioner for Future Generations. Yes, the idea is that a commissioner would be appointed, but that there is an office for Future Generations Commissioner, and that would effectively support the planning and the activity of that office in terms of all the areas that it needs to have an impact and influence on. So secondly, it was felt that there was a need to raise awareness of the concept and merits across government and the public. And this was very strongly felt that, you know, while there was really strong support from the thought leaders that were interviewed, there was a sense from some of those that there is a really high need still in Ireland to socialise the SDGs and broader connected concepts such as future generation planning, especially, you know, across other government stakeholders and the public, and that the public really need to be invested in this, because otherwise it is something that people could think of another quango, for want of a better word, that, you know, curiosity around the merits of it. So that there really does need to be a campaign to show the merits of this. And it is, you know, it is something that can be done and really show how this can bring positive benefits for future generations and how it has a positive impact. So there was also the sense that this needs to be very authentic and creative. Caroline, you mentioned using the arts and other things there. So that actually came up in this, that, you know, we really need to reach different people in different ways and be creative in how we reach out, so as all people can hear the message of what this concept is and how it's of benefit. And inclusive means in that outreach as well. Leverage the precedents. And so there are a number of precedents in the report that are mentioned in terms of, you know, what we might look at. We have wellbeing framework, we have a just transition group, we have how IREC was established, for example, or some of the methods that were listed in terms of precedents that offer some good example that we can use in establishing a Future Generations Commissioner for Ireland. So they are precedents that could be leveraged to move forward and fast track the establishment, to the point I made about the just do it. So we can get on, we can take the initial steps before all the nuts and bolts are in place. So the issue was, or the ask or the call was to embark immediately on the due diligence. We know that there needs to be some work done on due diligence and a scoping study, and scope the remit and governance arrangements for a Future Generation Commissioner role and office in Ireland. And so that is something that needs to start as soon as possible in terms of moving that agenda on. And then engage key stakeholders. So this is not something that should be designed or done by a consulting group or a singular group. It is something that needs to be done as a collaborative effort, that people can have an opportunity to input into the design and operation of a Future Generations Commissioner and the governance of it. So that is something that needs to happen as well, that this happens in a participatory and consultative process. And finally, that we build on Ireland's leadership, which, you know, there was genuine pride in the role that Ireland has taken on this agenda in the past, and build on that in leadership on intergenerational equity and the prominence given to it in the 2030 agenda and its importance to the world and indeed to Ireland. So this is what the document looks like. And yeah, as I said, it launched in September of this year. David unfortunately couldn't join us this evening, but David kindly penned this forward for us. which outlines that Irish, I suppose, leadership and where this has come from, both in the context of the SDG agenda, which he co-negotiated and co-authored the Transforming Our World document, but also the leadership of Mary Robinson before that process and since that process as well. So some of the topics that David has covered in his foreword are looking at how we can build on established commitments to future generations, put those into reality. He spoke of Mary Robinson over the years and over the decades being a tireless champion of intergenerational equity, and as recently as 2017 proposing that global guardians for future generations be appointed. And so that's not, that's obviously very connected to this idea of future generations commissioner as well, and even the special envoy role, I suppose, that was appointed by the UN. Agenda 2030, as we know, called for the bold and transformative actions that were required across the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, and stated in that document is to support the needs of present and future generations. So it as an intention was always embedded in Agenda 2030. And so David's closing remark in the foreword is that this call to action is an opportunity for Ireland to act in the interest of future generations. It is the right time to do the right thing, to act on promises and commitments given, and to help build a better future for all. So that's the comment in the foreword. So these two, and they're really from Coalition 2030, that made it into the Irish Daily Mirror and the Irish Daily Star, which is of interest because it's unusual for, the Star and the Mirror to take interest in a topic as, a topic like this, future generations, which for some, you'd imagine for some it's intangible. And that goes back to the concept I said of socialize this concept. But clearly it's a concept that can have traction and is of interest. They don't tend to publish these things, these topics, if they don't believe that they're of interest. So clearly it is a topic that they believe can be of interest or is of interest to the public. And that's seen by us in Coalition 2030 as a very positive thing. So it's great to see that the press are interested in covering this in the Mail and the Sun. So that's as much as I'm going to say in the presentation, and my watch has just gone off. I don't think I've gone over my time limit, and I think we've got plenty of time for us to have a chat. I've put 2 email addresses there. If there's another one, David Roster, that you would like people to use as well, perhaps put it in the chat. But again, that's our link to our document. And there's my own email and the coalition email for general queries. And David will put any other email he wants to put forward into the chat. So thank you for that, and plenty of opportunity now for discussion. So back over to you, Davy.
Thanks, Catherine. That was excellent. We're going to have a bit of time now for questions or reflections before David introduces the breakouts and what we'll do in the breakouts. So please, I can almost see everyone if you're not got your camera off, but you can use the React. There's a raise hand. If you press that React in the bottom toolbar, there's a raise hand. If anyone would like to come in with a question or an insight on this topic. David, you're going to get us started.
I'm going to be really, really quickly because I want to open it up for questions. But I think just in case anybody is coming to this fresh, just a little bit of maybe context and example of how this idea has really worked well. So the Welsh Government introduced a Welsh Future Generations Commissioner a number of years ago. And Sophie Howe was mentioned before. She had previously done that role. And so the Welsh Government was at a time where they're going to spend a lot of money on building a new motorway. And the Welsh Future Generations Commissioner was able to offer some analysis that actually that money would have been better spent potentially on like the public transport and actual travel, which would have been a better use of that money for future generations. So it allowed the Welsh Government to maybe break out of short-term decision-making processes that which we all get stuck in. And we're very aware of these 5-year election cycles as we hit our general election in Ireland. So that's really the type of thing that the commissioner could do many different things, but in an Irish context, but that's one example. So I just want to give that very quick example, Davy, just in terms of, breaking that down to, in a practical sense, what that might look like in an Irish context.
Thanks, David. That was very helpful. So, over to you all. There's a lot of expertise in the room as well, so doesn't have to be a question.
Sorry, Davey, Johnny here from the
Hi,
WEAll.
Johnny.
How are you? No, one of the things Catherine mentioned was, of course, to recognise the work that Marco Kohasik has done to bring a private members bill on the need for, or on the potential future generations commissioner for Ireland. And I suppose we'll all be, and maybe it's something for us to discuss, because as we know, the Dáil is now being dissolved. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the end for private members' bills, but at the same time, for any bill that's still weaving its way through, because I know it had been through the second stage. So maybe that's something for us to discuss. Is there an opportunity for us to, on the one hand, push across all of the parties and in the formation of the programme for government to commit to the private member bills? I mean, I think realistically, often private member bills are brought to raise attention, to put attention onto something, either a gap in current legislation or to put something on for all of the representatives of the Oireachtas, that something is important. And I think from what Catherine said, for me, certainly there is a lot of like when the research was done, there was an awful lot of support. Like there was nobody shouting, no, this is a crazy idea, this is terrible. There was actually a lot of support across the political spectrum. So it is something. So something to think about, though, in light of a new government forming, in light of things like that, how can we ensure that that momentum isn't lost? So it's just something that I'm kind of wondering about, just maybe for discussion in the groups.
Thanks, Johnny. Very helpful. I might just read out the piece in the chat from Marianne. The establishment of a Future Generations Commissioner is essential to realise the principles underpinning the Brundtland Report, 1987, and of course the Aarhus Convention, in particular access to justice pillar. Thanks for that, Marianne.
And I'll just add, Davey, if we are going to share the slides afterwards, I have put some slides into that slideshow that I didn't cover because I knew it wasn't within the, I suppose, the time frame. But there are also some slides and some links to toolkits around how future generations thinking and planning works. David mentioned the Welsh example of the roads and that infrastructure development. So that case study example from Wales is in there, but there's also some other examples of the ILO toolkit and, just a few other kind of examples of, well, what is the process of this and how is it different to how we normally plan and think? Yeah, so just to say that.
Thanks, Catherine. Caroline?
Yeah, just a question, Catherine. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Could you explain a little bit more about what due diligence means in this context? Because you mentioned the need for a due diligence process. Thanks.
Yeah. So I suppose it's just to look at the justification for the establishment of the new function and the new office and the justification of funding and remit and the necessity for an office like this and the distinction of an office like this from other existing office and how it can complement and not, I suppose, compete with. So it's to undertake research of looking at where best this positions, how it operates, how it's governed, how it feeds information into government, and what that structure looks like, what the governance structure of that looks like. So it's really to determine all those things in advance and what the best structure for those might look like, so as it can operate as well and not as well as possible and not be overly influenced by political decision and that kind of thing. So it's to look at it that way.
Thanks. Louise, do you want to come in?
And actually, the last thing you just said there, Catherine, is the start of my point, I think, or my question, is not to be overly influenced by government. So that's, I was a randomly selected member of the Citizens Assembly from 2016 to 2018, and I've been advocating for greater participation since. Now, my day job is in Trinity. It's not related to that at all, but I am a volunteer on a board that's heavily involved in increasing participation in general. And I suppose one of the main reasons I'm doing that is because a lot of the political agenda is short-term thinking, and the types of issues that we face as humans and as citizens are far longer term than the political cycle allows. And I think that's why the likes of citizens' assemblies are really important. But I fear that how they have been adopted, or I won't say how they've been adopted because they've been successful in many ways, but I have a slight concern that the continuation of the model just being rinse and repeat within the existing government, I think it needs to be separate. It strikes me that this commission kind of straddles that work slightly. There's some topics that have come up, certainly in the Citizens' Assembly, that I felt were much more suited to a body that had a greater mandate to be able to influence policy in the longer term. I mean, I'm just throwing out all these things that have come to me as I've been listening to you all this morning, but I hadn't heard of this work or this coalition until I saw the event in Trinity College. I didn't make it on the day, but I've been watching the videos and following the work. So I'm hugely interested in how this evolves. I think it's a good time, and I think that it's very necessary.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you,
Louise.
Louise. If you look at the model that's in the document around how IREC, so when we were talking about the precedent of IREC, how IREC is established and reports, it's really that one to give that independence and degree of autonomy. I think that's the one that we liked, but it's to follow that on in the scoping study and due diligence that is something that is worth looking at.
Great. Celestine, do you want to come in?
She might not have heard you, David.
Celestine, you're on mute if you're speaking.
So sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking there's already rights that children have, like to clean air and water and, not too much noise, this kind of thing, kind of human rights. And I wonder if this commissioner, part of his role might be to press for these rights to be upheld as a kind of on a legal footing, because they are for the future, but they're also current rights.
Thanks, Celestine. Catherine?
Yeah, absolutely. So the human rights underpinning the SDG agenda and Agenda 2030 are strongly referenced, and absolutely the delivery on human rights is, a core part of what we aim to do. So advocacy. So one of the functions that we reference in here is looking at ensuring government respects, protects, upholds the human rights of future generations, in line with the Maastricht principles of, So very much looking at human rights is something that we want to embrace. And one of the people that was interviewed as part of this research was Emily Logan, who is the former Chief Commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and first Ombudsman for children, moving into first police ombudsman. But yeah, so we also interviewed Michael O'Neill, who's head of legal at the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. So we were very mindful of the human rights connection with Agenda 2030 and SDGs, and the requirement for this role to deliver on human rights. And I think part of what we know about the human rights agenda is, while many of the human rights treaties and instruments that Ireland is signatory to, and also the human rights legislation that maybe we have in Ireland, but it's despite the fact that we might have signed up to these treaties, over a number of years ago, we're not delivering on everything that's enshrined in those at the moment. And so the need to really improve what we do in those areas is very much something that we need to look at. And at this stage, long-term thinking to ensure that future generations don't face the same issues and problems that we face now in relation to these human rights issues is something that needs to be on the agenda.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Davey. And I think it follows on from what Celestine was saying. So what strikes me listening to people is about the voices and rights of current generations. So, yes, there is an ombudsman for children, and I mean, there's lots of things that Noam Muldoon does, and Emily and others have done before that I think are really good, but actually it's not the same. So if we were, if you like, giving birth or imagining a new system, there may be some work to do on how the voices of children, young people, current generations are heard in the decision-making processes and deliberation, as well as introducing, not this isn't a criticism of anything, but as well as introducing the element of future generations' voice.
Mm-hmm. And thankfully, that is something that is now a requirement in developing new practices in Ireland, new policies, new guidelines. The input of young people has to be a part of that process now. So that's a welcome development in recent times. So when we talk about the consultative process that needs to be in place to establish the Future Generations Commissioner, young people will very much be a part of that. So, I don't think that any new developments in this vein, or indeed any policy developments in Ireland, need to listen to the voice of young people.
Brilliant. So if we exhausted questions and reflections, is anyone sitting with anything they need to say? Before I invite David, maybe just to frame what we want to do in the breakouts. Brilliant. Patricia, in you come.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Just we're talking a lot about the governance level for future generations. And Catherine, just a question for you. In the toolkit, is there anything around bringing future generations, maybe roles into community groups, local schools, who kind of are in contact with local councils, which may feed up to the political level? And if so, do you think that would support it, or are you kind of only looking from a governance level down?
So are you referring to the ILO toolkit, Patricia?
I'm not familiar with the toolkit. So the toolkit
right.
that you referred to.
Yeah. So I was referring to there when one of the methods, I suppose, that I referred to in the PowerPoint slides that I didn't get to, I put them there for people to look at if they want to, was an ILO toolkit, which looks at the whole process of planning, and what it looks like, what it needs to be, what modes are used in that kind of foresight planning, I suppose. And they would, like we are advocating, linking with a variety of different groups in that whole planning and governance process, that you look at all the different, you look at the current practice, the near future, the far future, you engage with different generations as to what they see. So it's not just, I suppose, top-down governance. It is to have that consultative, participatory approach that involves different segments of our communities in shaping what this Future Generations Commissioner would look like, and what any future generations planning should look like and should take into account.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Kathleen. So if there's no more questions, we are going to try and do a little breakout just to have a smaller group conversation. Some people might be more comfortable speaking up in a smaller group conversation. And David, you're going to just introduce what we might discuss in that breakout.
Yeah, thank you, Davey. So, yeah, feel free to take the discussion in whichever way you feel if the conversation is naturally going, but we would like to offer a suggestion maybe to get the ball rolling, and just so you can get your creative juices flowing. So as we've mentioned, there was previously a bill going through the Oireachtas, and this was a private member's bill from Marco Kohasig, who was I guess a government TD. That bill had gone through the first and second stages of the Dáil, and actually just I think about a week or two before the Dáil was dissolved, it had reached committee stage, and at that committee stage we would have seen a lot of cross-party support for the bill. Don't want to get too caught up in the long weeds of it, but the bill was proposing a commission that would eventually make a recommendation to the government on how to start or how to create this position in Ireland. So it's not what the bill necessarily wasn't a panacea, but it certainly was a step in the right direction for this. So the question really we want to pose to you, just as you go into your discussion groups, is obviously the dole has never been solved. That bill will now fall, really. So we're thinking a bit about how do we raise the noise on this in terms of the general election, and particularly we would love to make sure that this provision is in the next programme for government in Ireland. So we know after the election there'll be discussions for to form a government. So how do we include in that a commitment to create this sort of position? And I think Louise has touched on something really interesting earlier about how do we make sure that that position would even be at an arm's length from the government to be able to offer some interesting thoughts there. So really, as you go into the breakout rooms, it's about getting the ball rolling. How do you think, what are some of your ideas about how to maybe take this idea forward in the terms of the next government? How do we try and raise some noise and create some put some more attention back on this issue? But as I said, that's just a suggestion from us. Do feel free, if the conversations organically going in different directions, do feel free. And we will come back as a big group then, and time for people to just share what their thoughts were. But yeah.
Thanks, David. And before Caroline puts you into the groups, just to invite someone from each breakout to maybe take some notes if there's any insights that'd be worth sharing back to the plenary when we come back. And then when we come back, we'll just share some insights from each group and then hopefully get into a bit more of a discussion. So Caroline, are we okay to go to breakouts? We're just going to take a little time to hear back from each room and then get into a bit of a discussion before we close. So in room 1, who was in room 1? Hopefully you know your rooms. Great. And you're okay, Mark, to give us some insights from room 1?
Okay, I'll try, but I'm sure David will come in if I've missed anything. We just talked about 2024 as the year of elections, and I was making the point that the climate and ecological crisis wasn't as high up the agenda in many of them as we thought. And I was wondering what was going to happen now in the Republic of Ireland's election. And then we talked about the sort of the tension between the 3 core asks that David said that Coalition 2030 had put to the political parties versus the other side of the coin, which is really the complexity and the intersectionality of all the issues, and how it may well be that the working class people have got their limited bandwidth and can only think about getting food on the table and paying the bills, and those economic issues will come to the fore. But yet, for a future generations commissioner, we really need to, as I've said, think longer term than that. And if the ecological and climate issues are not addressed, we're going to narrow down the options that future generations have to maneuver if we're not very careful. So there's a tension and a difficulty there, and Suzanne pointed out that some of the policy agendas have got to 10 pages already, trying to deal with that complexity, and that's a big problem. And I don't think it can be ducked or avoided by a future generation office or commissioner.
Thanks, Mark. Was there anyone in that room that feels they need to add something, or we'll move on to room 2? Great. So room 2, I was in room 2, and
we go to group 5. Would you mind if we went to group 5? They just put a note in the chat there. Could they go next?
No problem. Thanks for that, group 5. And who's feeding back? Victoria?
Hi, that's me. Apologies. Sorry, I have to leave soon, and I took the notes for our group. I'll make this quick. Just the main points from us were, we were really looking at ways we could promote this and push this ahead of the elections and even moving on in the next year or so. The first thing that came up was we really feel we need to reach out to youth groups. I'm not sure how much this has or hasn't been done up to now, but groups such as Fridays for Future and other groups and who work on other social justice issues, etc., and get them involved in the process and really aware of this and how much this links to the work and campaigns they are working on currently. This is a great way to really promote this as well, because they themselves will promote this through their own networks, through their peers, and really spread the word. we think making the use of social media, that this is a great way, obviously, to spread the word amongst particularly younger generations, but all generations, and getting people involved in creating campaigns online, getting involved in campaigns, taking online actions, just building, I guess, a momentum and a hype around this. And also as a group, for us as individuals, to have the opportunity to kind of canvass and raise our voices on this ahead of the elections, but maybe to like, sorry, I've lost my point in my notes. I'm not sure what our point was on that. It was, yeah, sorry, I think it was just for us together to come together as a whole and to be able to, as a group, canvass and promote amongst candidates them to commit to this ahead of the elections, and those that are elected to then commit, of course. And a suggestion around this was that if we could create some sort of an email template that could be sent not just to us involved in this or who are aware of this, but to others who maybe haven't got involved yet, that they can see this. If they support it, they can send a template and start to put that pressure on politicians as well. So that was it. If I forgot anything, someone from our group can add it in. And yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent, Victoria. Thank you. Does anyone else from Group 5 want to say anything? Or we'll move on. Perfect. So Group 2, I was in Group 2, and Carol, you're going to feedback.
Yeah, so I suppose we were just saying, are we finished just talking about the current election and the space in the media for this conversation, and to set the seed of the word future generations as well? That I suppose the wider that this word is spread, that it's less of a foreign concept for the public and government for the future. But actually it was a good point that, I mean, it really should be an easy sell as well. And there's lots of entry points. There's a lot of on the imagining what the future looks like in rural Ireland or in the cities, that opportunity to kind of reframe how we view progress beyond economic progress. And yeah, and actually there was just so I suppose it was partly that reminder, because we had Catherine in our group as well. So it was the reminder that was the reframing of progress beyond the economy, but also that that's like there's an opportunity for politicians in having a future generations commissioner, because it's I suppose a safety net, because that future generations commissioner can hold that long-term thinking that's a risk for politicians to embark on. And actually I'm going to say, if anybody from my group just wants to jump in or add to that.
Thanks, Carol. Anyone from Group 2 to add any more? We don't have to regurgitate everything we discussed, but it was a good discussion. We thought there'd be a lot to learn from Wales, didn't we? That was one of the things we said. Okay, let's move to Group 3 then. Is someone from Group 3 can share some insights?
Hi, Davy. John Humphreys here. Yeah, I'll report on Group 3, at least for starters, anyway. And the others may have something else to add. We started off really just talking about the office itself for a start. A couple of points about it. We referred back to the earlier session where somebody said it was important, you know what I mean, to include young people of today, you know, and so on. We said that's fine indeed, but this is really trying to put something that's in place very long term and really long term thinking. So we need to kind of force that long term thinking. The other thing about the institution is that should be independent of the government or of government departments. Shouldn't be a new incoming government shouldn't be able to overturn things that had been previously decided upon, and probably that the Commission for Future Generations should report directly to the Oireachtas. That was another part of the discussion regarding Wales and what we had to learn about Wales, and also there was some talking about Marco Collins' private members bill. That rather than wait to have legislation in place to underpin the the office, which can take a long time to put in place. Some things could be done, and I think could be got moving, through other mechanisms rather than waiting to have a full set of legislation. But anyway, then to address the topic that we were asked to address as to how we get it out there and how do we promote it and so on. One of the strongest points that was made was that we really need the buy-in and the engagement of young people in this, right? Okay, and particularly, to get them to make some noise and so on. Places where we can find them would be, there's a huge amount of student groups in the universities. There's the National Youth Council of Ireland and so on, right? Okay. Other things we should be doing to try to promote the idea, that would be, we're coming up to a period now where there'll be government formation. We should be talking to politicians, of all parties to try to get it on the agenda. When the governments are formed, we should have various people, including young people, going in to talk to Oireachtas committees, right? Okay, and trying to push the agenda there as well. Let's see, anything else here then? Yeah, but with regard to young people, they don't pay too much attention to regular, media channels such as the newspapers and the TV. Even though it's very good that we got the attention of the Irish Star and the Irish Mail and the Irish Mirror. We need a campaign going on other media, for young people to get in. So I think those were the main points. And guys, if I missed anything important, or that, please have your say,
Thanks, John. Everyone happy from room 3? So
I'm just thinking as well, sorry, on that, young people, what about actually hitting, the musicians and stuff, that the local Irish musicians that the young people are connecting with and follow, and because it would obviously endorse the young people, but just as importantly, it would endorse the actual musicians. So it's a win-win on a massive scale, and then it can be retweeted and TikToked continuously, and it's an angle that hasn't really been done in these sort of bureaucratic.
We should get Kneecap on board.
Okay, let's keep with the updates, and then we can get into a bit of discussion before we close. So that was room 3. So room 4? Who's feeding back from room 4?
Can I just confess, I was supposed to take notes. I volunteered at the very start, and then I remembered halfway through that I wasn't taking notes. So I'm going to do a very bad job of this, and I really hope that everybody in my group jumps in and fills in bits. Okay, I've been furiously trying to write notes here. So we talked about the SDGs. We're talking about the world in which the UN, that time and place when that was established, and the SDGs, and they're not working clearly. They're not connecting with people. They're not being implemented at the level that we need them to be. I think they feel overwhelming, and garnering support for future generations. The current economic models and the structures aren't fit for the world and the challenges that we have now, the meta crisis, if you want to call it that. We talked about well-being and how that the IDGs, community care, all of that. I mentioned then, and I don't know if this is all just what I was saying, so help me. So there was a couple of examples emerging of permanent citizens' assemblies that have been established to tackle issues that are longer term societally, human rights, climate equality, all that type of thing. Could there be an element of that where there's, linked to the Oireachtas, that it's mandated to do something with some recommendations to come from this commission? Otherwise, it really, it doesn't have any fire in its belly, right? We were talking then, we were at the last minute, we were cramming, trying to get what we needed to do for this. So we're like, we need a 1-pager for canvassing. We agreed that it was a really important time, that on a very practical level, we can canvass the hell out of anybody who comes to our door, any organizations, any local politicians, having a 1-pager maybe to share with schools, with GAA, local WhatsApp groups, whatever, literally trying to connect with families and members, because everybody's invested in this. And I think that's why it's getting picked up in the red tops, is because this is a message everybody's talking about, but nobody has a sense of agency or feeling like they can do anything about it. We were looking then, future generations. The work I'm doing is with kids in primary school, trying to get more 3rd level STEM diversity, right? But we're doing that at primary level. Why are we just talking about secondaries and third levels. We should be looking at primary age kids. You know, there's green committees in every school up and down the country run through on Tashka. Why don't we get that on their agenda? My kid has just texted me tonight telling me that she was at the meeting there. She's 9. We need a petition then maybe online that we can get people to start signing for establishing a commission. Anybody else in my group? Did I leave anything out?
You did well, Louise. You did very well. Anyone else in room 4 want to add to that?
Just one, Louise, you did a super job. Just one thing, local action having a global impact is just, as you said, the community groups establishing a future generation lead role in every organisation as an action. If we're in any community groups, we should kind of look at having that in and reflecting off the Welsh, system, even though it hasn't happened here, and that'll filter up to local councils and through TDs. But otherwise, everything else was great.
Right, thanks, Patricia. Okay, and the last room was room 6. If anyone wants to feedback from room 6, some of your insights.
I can say some words, and then maybe other people can follow as well. So, being the last group, of course, all of the above, and Caroline Crowley introduced the word care, which I think was a really good word to bring into the conversation. And for me, there's a kind of a meta overarching thing about, this is one of those initiatives that can help encourage a caring society, a society that's not just about everything, what's for me now, what tax cut am I going to get, or whatever else. So it's trying to take political conversation to a different kind of place. That we are people who care about some bigger, wider, deeper things, and this is a bit lateral, but actually one of the bits of the conversation that I really enjoyed was we also talked about past generations. So I'm not really, I don't think we're suggesting this as an actual initiative, but in a way there's the voice of past generations and traditional Irish indigenous wisdom, says the Englishman, but I mean that what would past generations say about some of the messes that we've got into and some of the crazy things we're doing, is a kind of an interesting thing to say. If we were able to have conversations and policy processes in a more whole, rational sense, then actually in some way some of those past voices and wisdom would be in there as well. But that's not, we're not suggesting that we actually have a commissioner for that necessarily. We're just saying that was an interesting part of the conversation. So David, Charles, Caroline, Paul were with me. I don't know if any of them have anything to add.
The invitation to add to group 6 feedback.
I think I'd just quickly mention something I felt strongly about, which was, first of all, this is really urgent. This is something that we should be caring about very much, especially in the context of the current economic model and the damage it's doing. And secondly, this whole notion that maybe having a commissioner for future generations allows some cross-cutting things. The whole point is there's so much, the worry is everything's so much siloed in government, and this provides an opportunity to have a different perspective.
Thanks, David. So we've only a couple of minutes until our last piece, just next steps from David and Caroline. So is anyone sitting with anything that would be good to say, to share?
Just a quickie. I'm thinking of you could actually do links and articles for Future Generation Commissioner and get the word out there through Feasta and other major trade unions and Volunteer Ireland, and on their website where people actually see them, and it would cost a lot of money, but it would have a widespread. And we could also do video testimonials from like musicians or popular politicians, but also take it from a north point of view too, not just in the south, so that's more publicity in the north as well. Just an idea.
Thanks for that. there was someone that was come to me about the need to be good ancestors for us right now for future generations. Okay, we're right on time. So will we start with you, Caroline, just for some next steps, and then David to close?
Sure. Yeah. Just firstly, thanks so much to everyone for all your ideas. It's been a fantastic mixture of very practical ideas and very philosophical thoughts as well. Really good mixture, very interesting. And there's some things obviously that could be done quite quickly and it would be good to do quickly. So we'll be talking about that in the very short term. As I mentioned, so we're the WEAll Ireland Hub and we're working with Coalition 2030 and the overarching kind of structure is the School of International Futures that has put this together. And confusingly, they also call it a hub. So there's actually two hubs, which is a bit confusing. But anyway, basically, we're this larger group and we're going to try and find more people to join as well, and more groups, hopefully. So anything that we talk about can be put beyond Coalition 2030, beyond the WEAll Hub. And, you know, it's can be as wide-reaching as we want, obviously. I'll just talk very quickly about what the WEAll Ireland Hub is planning and also the School of International Future. So basically, we're hoping to we're sort of talking to the school at the moment, and they are hoping to secure some funding so that all of us together with the coalition can continue with this trajectory on working on these different areas. And I was really pleased that citizens' assemblies were mentioned, because actually that's also a thing that the School of International Futures is recommending that we work on as well, integrating that in and making sure the whole citizens' assembly process has teeth and that it's really aligned with the well-being of future generations as well. So all of these things will go together and we'll be keeping you posted on the details. We have a mailing list for the WEAll Ireland Hub and I'll put the link in the chat. A couple of our things that are definitely coming up in the next few months is we're having an event about housing on the wellbeing economy, housing ourselves, on February 14th. It's going to be a hybrid event. It'll be based in Cloughjordan, but it'll be hybrid so people can dial in. So if you'd like to be kept posted, just please sign up to our newsletter. I'll put the link in the chat. I'll also link to our conference from June. You can see a little bit of our past actions. And we have other events coming up in the next few months, including a deep dive focused on sound and the work of our music and sound and the relationship between that and changing narrative, which is one of the things that came up today as well. So I think that's all I had to say. So I'll pass on to David for some final updates from.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yes, certainly to me, this has felt like the beginning of a conversation, not the end. I think there's a lot of really great ideas there and a lot of energy to try and keep driving this idea forward. Certainly from the coalition side, I'll be going away. We're writing our work plan at the moment for next year, along with members. So I think we'll be trying to incorporate some of these ideas in. Particularly really like the idea of maybe something more campaign orientated with the general public as well. These events are lovely, but you know it's nice to not be talking to everyone else who is also converted. But yeah, certainly we should be putting some plans together about how to really try and drive this forward. As I said, Caroline has mentioned the hub, so do try and connect with us there, where we'll be continuing on some of these ideas along with our international partners in the School of the International Future. But as I said, yeah, we will be in touch again with some future, keeping it on brand, some future work to think about. Yeah, Davey, do you want to wrap us up and then we can say goodnight?
Well, let's just say thanks to Kathleen Carty for kicking us off, and thanks for everyone for contributing to such a rich conversation tonight. And as David says, let us continue that with Coalition 2030 and the Wellbeing Economy Hub. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Davey, for your moderation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.